Masechet Baba Batra, Daf Memchet. Yesterday, we saw the halacha that Rav Nachman taught in the name of Rav Huna regarding a robber. Not only can a robber not make a hazakah, we don't trust him, but furthermore, even if a robber brings proof, he brings two witnesses that the seller admits, yes, I sold it to this guy, we don't trust that admission because we assume that this robber, this thug, forced the admission in front of witnesses, but really the guy never wanted to give up his property, and therefore this admission is invalid, and we do not allow the robber to keep that property. We take it away from the robber. So, seems according to this, Rav Huna says that something that's forcibly given to a robber is not a valid transaction. What we're going to see today is that this is only if it's a gift, if the robber did not pay for it. The robber just says, right, give it to me, or else, and admit that you sold it to me. So then the robber is, this is an invalid sale, and we give the property back to the original owner. However, Rav Huna, we're about to show, says that if it's a sale, meaning if the robber gives money, some proper amount of money to the owner, even though it's a forced sale, the sale is valid. So that's what we start with today. Amar Rav Huna, Talyu v'zaben zebine zebine. If a thug comes and suspends someone, picks someone up by their collar, or you hang them from a tree, and you say, I'm not letting you down until you sell me your field. The guy says, no, I don't want to sell you my field. It's not for sale. And he says, no, you better be for sale. All right, he's going to pay for it. All right, some appropriate value. And he forces him to sell it. And he says, okay, what am I going to do? I don't want to stay on the tree forever. And so he sells it and collects money. Then the sale is valid, even though it was forced. That is Rav Huna's rule. First, we're going to bring some sources for it, and then we're going to challenge it from some other sources. Mai ta'ama. What's the reason? Kol de mezaben inish ilav de anis lahava mezaben vafilu hachi zebine. So what Rav Huna explains, the reason is because anytime someone sells property, even without a thug there, there's nobody else there, why would you sell property? It's always good to keep property. Property goes up in value, it lasts a long time, you inherit it to your children, so property is good. Person only sells real estate if they are under financial duress. And so, nevertheless, it is still valid, right? If I'm under financial stress, I can't afford food. I can't afford the medical bill. Oh, what am I going to do? I have to sell a property. So if I have to sell it, so I go ahead and sell it. And obviously, it's a valid sale. I can't come later and say, oh, I didn't really want to sell it. I was just short on cash. So in any case, when someone sells real estate, it's because they are under duress, financial duress, and it's valid. And so too here, even though a thug is coming and saying, you better sell it to me or else, and that's under threat of violence, nevertheless, once he does agree to sell it, it is a valid sale. So that's the initial explanation. But we reject this. Hold on, maybe duress that comes from one's own needs is different from when it comes from someone else. I am in charge of my financial situation, and I decide, you know what, I really want to buy a car, but I can't afford it. All right, I'll sell real estate to buy a car. So I make a decision, right? If I'm going, I want to live a certain lifestyle, I'll sell this, I won't sell that. Or even if I can't afford clothing, you know what, I need to sell it. That's one thing if it comes from one's own duress. That I decided, yes, I'd rather sell this than go have to work another job. That's my decision. But duress that comes from someone else who's hanging me on a tree, well, that's a completely different type of duress. And so this is not a good proof. This is not a good reason for the statement of Rav Huna. So we're going to look for another one. Ela kedetanya. Yakrib oto melamed shekofin oto. Yachol be'al korcho tamod omar lirsono. Hakesad kofin oto ad shiomar rose ani. Rather, we're going to derive it from the following following baraita that teaches, if I make a donation, I pledge I'm going to bring a certain korban, and now I'm not bringing it. The court hears that I made a ned, I'm going to bring this korban, so yakrib oto means that the court will force a person to bring that donation of that korban. Now, does that mean even against his will we're going to do so? We're going to threaten him with lashes or whatever and force him to do so? No, but the pasuk says lirsono. He has to want to bring a korban. You have to be willing. It has to be. It doesn't make sense. It's not going to have any positive effect on a person if they're doing it under duress. You want to make an offering. You want to show. It's like forcing a kid to apologize or forcing someone to give a gift and they don't want to. What kind of korban? What value is that korban? So how could it be that both yakriv oto, the bet din forces him to do so, but also the person bringing it has to do it willingly? So how do we combine both of these words in the same pasuk? The answer is the bet din will coerce him until he says, I want to. Yes, we might have to incarcerate him or give him a fine or lashes, however the bet din is going to deal with it, and we force him until he says, okay, I'll do it. Once he says, okay, I'll do it, he's doing it willingly. The point is that we know the person deep down really wants to fulfill the halacha. He wants to do the right thing. And there's Yetzer Hara is pulling him away from it. He's being stingy. He's being lazy. So we have to help him out to do what he really wants to do inside. So we see from here that even though it's forced, this korban, nevertheless, once he says, okay, I'll do it, then it's considered willing. So too regarding a sale, we could say the same thing. Even though this thug came and forced him to sell it, after the violence, the threat worked, but then once he says, okay, I'll sell it to you, so then he really means it, and it is a valid sale. So is that a good analogy? No. Maybe in the case of a korban it's different because the person wants to have atonement, right? And he says, deep down, and now I realize, you know what? I really do want atonement, and I promised this korban. I am obligated to bring it, and I want to make sure I fulfill my obligation so I can receive atonement. So that's why, once they force him and he says, I want to, he really means that I want to. But in the case of selling your field, I'm not gaining any atonement by selling my field to this thug. So even when I say, okay, fine, I'll do it, I don't really want to. And so these cases are not comparable. So let's try a third source. In the second half of a Mishnah in Masechet Arachin, it says that the same is true, similar to what we just saw regarding a korban, the same is true for a get that's given to a woman. That if a man has to, when he gives a get, he has to do so willingly. If it's a forced get, someone forces him to give the get, then it's an invalid get. It's called the get me'useh, as we'll see in a minute. So let's say a bet din sees a case of a man and a woman, and the bet din decides, listen, man, you have to give a get, right? We obligate you to do so, and he's refusing. So the bet din has the power to force him to do so, whatever, give him lashes or whatever they need to do, until he says, okay, fine, I'll do it, I want to. And then he gives the get, and this is considered valid. So this is a good source, just like regarding a man who's forced to give a get, but then he says, I want to. And here, there's no issue of atonement. He's not getting atonement by divorcing his wife. He just has something that the bet din thinks he has to do, and so he does it, and it's valid, even though it was under duress. So too regarding a sale, when some thug comes and says, sell me your land or else, and he says, okay, fine, then it's a valid sale. So is this a good source? Maybe that case is different because there is a mitzvah to listen to what the chachamim say. And if the sages said, listen, a husband, you need to give your wife a get. So at first he doesn't want to for whatever reason. But then once they beat out his Yetzer Hara out of him, then he comes around and realizes, you know what? The rabbis are right and this is the right thing to do. So we're just getting getting him to come to his senses by forcing him. And when he says, I want to, we assume he really means it, because most people want to do the right things. That's the right thing. But that will not apply to a thug who's trying to take my property. There's no positive value to giving over my property. This is my land. I want to keep it. He's forcing me to sell it. Otherwise, it's going to leave me hanging on a tree. So that's why I said yes, but I never really meant it. And therefore, that also is not the same, is not a source. Rather, these analogies don't work, so we go to just logical reasoning that although the person is coerced, once he is coerced, he decides, you know what, okay, I will sell it. And that's just the human psychology. Even though in the other cases, he did it because of atonement, he did it because the rabbis wanted to. Yes, that's true in those cases. But the truth is, even without that, if a person is forced to do something and then he decides, okay, I'll do it, so then he does give it over. Again, we're saying it's not that it's fair that this thug took it from him or anything like that. Thug is a bad guy. But the question is this transaction a valid transaction, or is it just stealing? So if he just takes it, that's stealing. He gets it back. But if he said, sell it to me, here's the price, right, and do a transaction, sign a document, or right, do some kind of action to transfer the property, and he does it, well, then it's a valid action, and the property really does get transferred. Okay, good. So now we have a source in logical reason. Now we're going to challenge Rav Huna's law. Motiv Rav Yehuda. Get ha-me'useh b'Yisrael kasher, b'goyim pasul, u'b'goyim hobtin otov, amrim lo, aseh ma she'Yisrael omer lecha, ve'amai. A question is from a Mishnah in Gitin that says that a get that is given by compulsion, some other force is making the husband give the get under duress. So it depends. If it's a Jewish court that looks into it and says, listen, husband, there's various reasons why the court would do so. Let's say the husband is very smelly. He's a tanner. And she says, I can't stand him. I can't be in the same room with him. I don't want to be married to him. The Bet Din will say, oh, that's a valid reason why she deserves to get a divorce, and they will force him. And if he says, no, I don't want to, so they'll whip him until he says, okay, fine, I'll do it. That's valid. Now, if they are in a non-Jewish court, then it's invalid. The non-Jewish court says, give him a get or else, and the non-Jewish court goes and puts him in jail or whips him. That's not valid. However, if in the non-Jewish court they hit him, but the non-Jewish court says, you have to do whatever the Jewish court said to do, right? The non-Jewish court is only enforcing what the Jewish court already decided. In that case, the get is valid because the non-Jewish court is just backing up what the Jewish court would say. Okay, that's the end of the Mishnah. Now here's the question. Why, when the non-Jewish court hits him and says, give the get, why is it not valid? Why don't we say in that case also, even though it's under duress, but he agreed, and even though it's from a non-Jewish court, so it's not within one of the cases where it's appropriate and proper that he get hit and he has to do it. Why don't we say, even though the non-Jewish court is doing it, and maybe they're doing it for the wrong reason, whatever they decided, but still, this guy, even after he got threatened to have his legs broken, he said, okay, I'll give it, and he gave it. So why don't we say here also, based on this logic, that once a person is forced, then they do decide and they say, okay, fine, I'll do it. Why don't we say here also that he decided, okay, fine, I'll really divorce her. And we should say it's a valid get. It's a good question. And the answer is, itamad Allah, amar Rab Misharshia. Devar Torah afilu begoyim kasher. Umatam amru begoyim pasul, kedei shelo tehe kol achat ve'achat holechet vetola atzma, biyad goy umfaka'at atzma, biyad ba'ala. So Rab Misharshia said about this Mishnah that from the letter of the law, mideoraita, even if a non-Jewish court forces a husband to give a get, nevertheless, it's a valid get. That's actually the Torah law. However, the rabbis came and they imposed a stringency and said, no, in the non-Jewish court, we say that the get will be invalid. The rabbis have that power to say such a thing. Why did they do that? So that you wouldn't have any woman who is somewhat upset about their marriage, if they go to a Jewish court, the Jewish court is going to ask questions and say, right, maybe we could do shalom bayit, let's see, what was the problem? Is it a real problem? So they don't want to deal with that. And so any woman that wants out of their marriage in the easy way could go and depend herself on some non-Jew, through one way or another. She'll get the non-Jewish court to do what she wants, and she can release herself from the husband. We don't want marriages to be dissolved so easily. We don't want to also make it too difficult for a woman to leave a marriage. Is a proper balance, and this is not in the proper balance that the rabbis saw. And therefore they said, even though from the letter of the law, you're right, we do follow Rav Huna, we do follow this logic that when someone is forced to do something, even though it was in an invalid way, like selling your property to a thug, or a non-Jewish court hitting the guy till he gives the get, even though technically it is valid on the Doraita level, it's the rabbis that said, no, it's not valid in terms of get. So we answered that question. Next challenge. Motiv Rav Hamnuna. Lakach misi karikon v'chazav lakach mibal habayit. Mikacho batel. Ve'amai hatam nami nema agavun se gamar umakne. Mishnah that we saw yesterday, that if these Roman sicarii, they would have these little daggers, and they go and forcibly take people's land. And so if they do that, now they don't want the land, they just take it to flip it. Then another Jew wants to buy that land from the sicarii. So let's say they pay a certain amount to that Roman thug. And then they go to the original owner to say, listen, original owner, technically it's yours. So can we, I want to make it right. So can you do a transaction so to give it to me? Even if the original owner says, okay, fine, right, and does a transaction, does a kinyan chalipin say, it's not valid. Because we assume that the original owner is forced. He never wanted to give away his property or sell his property, and he only did it because this Roman had a dagger, was going to kill him. And if he doesn't go through and do the transaction with the other Jew who's going to buy it, then the Roman will come back with the dagger. So he's only doing it under duress, and therefore it's invalid. So now this is a challenge to Rav Huna. Why is it invalid? Why don't we say here also Rav Huna's reasoning that although it was under duress, once he was coerced, he decided, okay, fine, I will transfer the property, and it should be valid according to Rav Huna. And the answer is, Rav limited this Mishnah and says this Mishnah is only true when the original owner says to the buyer, orally, go and take it, go and grab hold of it and take possession of it. So since he only said it orally, he didn't really mean it, and therefore it's invalid. But if the original owner wrote it down in a document and he signed a deed over, then it is valid. Why is it valid? Because even though it was under duress, still, once he was forced, he did agree to it. So you see that this Mishnah is actually very limited to a case when he didn't write a deed. But if he wrote a deed, that means he's serious about it. Hold on, that good answer is good for Rav. But Shemuel said that even if the original owner wrote a deed, still it's an invalid sale. But why should it be invalid? Look, he wrote a document. Doesn't that show that he means it, even though he was forced? But once he was under duress, now he wants to give it over. Now he means it. Challenge against Rav Huna's logic. And the answer is Modeh Shemuel hechadihav zuzeh. No, Shemuel agrees that if the thug gave money to the original owner, then it's a valid sale. The sicarii, sometimes they would give money, all right, and said, you sell me your field, not I'm taking your field. If he says I'm taking your field, and the original owner never agreed to that. Even if he writes a deed, still, that we don't believe it. Right? He was just forced to write the deed, but he never had in mind to actually transfer ownership. But If someone forces him and gives money, says, here's $1 million, and I'm taking your field, okay, he got money. Even though it was a forcible sale, Shmuel agrees that that is valid. And so this is in line with Rav Huna. Even though it was under duress and he didn't want to sell it, but once he was coerced, then he agreed, and he got money for it, okay, then it's valid. So here, this is the key to understanding the two statements of Rav Huna from yesterday and today. There's a difference between a forced gift and a forced sale. If someone just takes something, he says, give it to me as a gift, or else, he says, okay, fine, I'll give it to you as a gift. Here, I'll write a document. That's not valid, because he doesn't get any money from it. So we assume that he did not really mean to give it as a gift. However, if the person says, sell it to me, or else, and he says, okay, I'll sell it to you, and he takes money, and he accepts the money, then, even though it's forced, it is valid. So that's what Rav Huna explains the two statements of Rav Huna, and it also helps explain how he would deal with this Mishnah in accordance with Shmuel, who makes the same distinction. Hold on, Rav Bevai had another interpretation of that Mishnah that we saw yesterday, and he said, the conclusion of it in the name of Rav Nachman is that even that the land does not stay with the thug, but the money goes back to the thug. Even if the robber paid for it, here's $1 million, I'm taking your land. So it's an invalid sale, and the original owner gets back his land, and the money goes back to the thug. So you see that even though you pay for it, it's still an invalid sale. So you see, according to Rabbi Bevai, not only is a forced gift not valid, a forced sale is also not valid. And this is not consistent with Rav Huna, who said that a forced sale is valid. Because even though he was forced, but then he decided, okay, I'll give it. So how are we going to answer that? And the answer is, Rabbi Bevai memrahu, memra Rav Huna la sibira le. Rabbi Bevai is not a Tana. In fact, he's a third generation Amora. Rav Huna is a second generation Amora. So Rav Huna does not have to answer to Rav Bevai. Rav Huna can follow Rav and can follow Shmuel, who are his teachers, and Rav Bevai. So any Amora can argue with any Amora, and certainly an early Amora does not have to reconcile himself with a later Amora. So that was Rabbi Bevai's opinion, right? According to Rabbi Bevai, a forced sale is not valid, but according to Rav Huna, it is valid. Amar Rava Hilcheta Taliu v'Zaben Zibine Zibine. Rava says the bottom line halacha is in accordance with Rav Huna that if someone forces someone to sell, the sale is a valid sale. However, we're going to now limit the Rava, but then we're going to undo the limitations. But we only say that the halacha is that it's a valid sale if the thief, the bully, comes and says, give me a field of yours, right? You have 10 fields. I don't care which field. I'm forcing you. You better sell me one of your fields. And so, what am I going to do? I don't want him to hang me up on a tree. So he says, okay, fine. Take this field B over here. So in that case, because you decided which field to give, so by doing that decision, by making a choice, you show that, okay, although you don't want to sell any fields, but the guy's forcing you, so in that case, the sale is valid. But if the thug comes and says, I want this specific field, and pays you for it, and you give over the field, there you don't really mean it. So because when he says, give me any field, and you choose, you have some agency, and you're doing something, and that choice of saying, okay, take this one, shows that, okay, there's some willingness to do it. But if it says this or else, then you just have absolutely no choice. Okay, parents use this psychological trick on kids. I said, do you want to go to sleep now or in 10 minutes? Okay, so you made a choice. So see, you made a choice. You chose it, which one you want. Okay, but anyway, that does show some willingness more than if there's no choice at all. ובשדה זו נמה, לא מרן אלא דלה ארסה זוזה, אבל ארסה זוזה לה. And even if the thug comes and says, I want this specific field, it's only considered a valid sale if the seller did not count the money. But if he took the money and counted it, then that shows the seller was somewhat willing. In other words, the thug comes and says, I want this land, right? Or else. So he says, okay, what am I going to do? He says, okay, fine. So he takes a wad of money, puts it in his pocket, takes the field, and the seller didn't even count the money. That shows that the seller really did not want to do it. But if he takes the money and then counts it out, it says, oh, so you see that by doing that, that shows that he reconciled with the fact, not that he wanted it in the first place, but that he was okay with it, and therefore he really did have in mind to give over the field to the thug. And we only say that it's an invalid sale if there was no other possibility for the seller. He couldn't get out of it. But if he could have gotten out of it, some way to avoid selling it, then we don't say so. In other words, if the thug came to the seller, and the seller could have run to the police, he could have called for help, he could have defended himself, and he didn't do that. Instead, he said, okay, fine, I'll sell it to you. Then that means he really meant it. But if he had no possibility, he was cornered, there's nothing he could have done to get out of it, then the sale is invalid. והלכתה בכולהו תאהבו זביני זביני ואפילו בשדה זו תהה אישה כשדה זו דמיה ואמר הממר תליו וקדיש Kiddushav, Kiddushin. And the final halacha, even though we just made a bunch of limitations against what Rava said. Rava said that a forced sale is always valid. Then we said, no, that's not true. If he said sadezo, then it's invalid. And if he couldn't have gotten out of it, he couldn't have avoided it, then it's an invalid sale. So even though we put these limitations, but the final halacha is in all cases, the sale is valid. Any coerced sale is in fact valid. Even if the thug comes and says, I want this particular field, and what can I do? I have to give it to him. Then even so, the sale is valid. Because even though he was coerced, but he decided, okay, I'd rather give the field and get beat up. So he fully has in mind that he's going to transfer over the ownership of the field. Now, what's the proof that this is so? Well, the proof is from Kiddushin. Because if a man, let's say a man forcibly does Kiddushin with a woman. Now, that's like Sadeh Zoh. He's not saying, pick anyone. He says, this particular man, I am doing Kiddushin with you, this particular woman. And so this is the same as Sadeh Zoh. And yet, Amemar says that if someone comes and forces a woman to accept Kiddushin, you're not supposed to do that, but she says, okay, fine, I'll do it, right? Someone says, you better accept this Kiddushin or else. She doesn't want to. But, okay, she's forced to, so she does it. The Kiddushin is valid, right? Because we assume, even though it was under duress, nevertheless, once she decided, okay, fine, I'll do it, then that she does in fact give over her mind to accept the Kiddushin. And just like that's, even though that's Sadeh Zoh, yet it's a valid transaction, so too, in the case of Sadeh Zoh, it is a valid transaction. So therefore, you see, in all cases, a forced sale is a valid transaction. Now, this last analogy regarding Kiddushin is not agreed upon by everybody. Mor bar Rav Asher amar be'isha vadai Kiddushin lahavu hu asa shelo kehogen lefichach asu imo shelo kehogen v'af ke'ayinu rabbanan lekiddusheha mineh. Mor, the son of Rav Asher, says regarding a woman, for sure the Kiddushin is invalid if it's a forced Kiddushin. Why? The husband, he did something that was improper by forcing her to accept the Kiddushin. You're not supposed to do that. You're supposed to ask her, right? Is this okay? Do you accept this ring? And she has to agree to it by accepting the ring. So he forced her to do so. That's improper. Therefore, the rabbi said, we're going to do something improper to him, and they are going to uproot the Kiddushin from him. In other words, they're going to retroactively say that that act that you did when you gave her the ring, it's only a valid act if that ring belonged to you. The Bet Din has the ability to say, this ring doesn't belong to you, so if he gives someone else's ring to her, then the Kiddushin was not good. The rabbis, it's not a divorce. They just say, back that thing that you did. Another way to explain it is that you say kedat Moshe v'Yisrael. So I'm doing kiddushin according to the law of Moshe and Israel. Israel means the sages, and since the sages said this is improper, so it's like doing it on condition. And so the rabbis put in that every kiddushin will be conditional on the husband doing it the right way. And so therefore, even though from the letter of the law, this is a valid transaction. And regarding a sale, Mor Barav Asher would agree that a sale of a field that's forced is a valid sale, even in Sadeh Zo, because there the rabbis don't interfere. But here, when it comes to kiddushin, the rabbis don't like that a husband would do that, and therefore the rabbis have the power to uproot the original kiddushin. And therefore, if she didn't want to enter into this marriage, and it was only done by force, then the rabbis say, "Don't worry, you're not married." ואמר לרבינה לרב אשה, תנח דקדש בחספה, קדש בביאה מאיגה למאמר. So Ravina asked Rav Ashe, okay, that works regarding money. Because regarding money, there the Bet Din can say, Hefker Bet Din, Hefker. That money, that ring that you gave her, we say it was never yours to begin with, and therefore it wasn't yours to give over to her, and therefore the Kiddushin is invalid. But what are you going to do about a case of Bi'ah? That was one of the ways of Kiddushin, is through Bi'ah. Bi'ah, Rahirat Mekudeshet, Bi'ah Zo. And so if he does through Bi'ah, so then how can the rabbis undo that? It's a physical act that he did. And says even here, yes, the rabbis can redefine that act, even though he thought that he was doing an act of Bi'ah for the sake of Kiddushin. Their rabbis come and they redefine it and say that act was not Kiddushin, but rather it was just Zinut. If just some men and some women, single people, go and have Bi'ah, but they do it not for the purpose of Kiddushin, just like that. So that's called Zinut. They're not automatically married. They didn't have in mind to be married. So even though this guy, maybe he did have in mind that he wanted to do for Kiddushin, and he even said so, but the rabbis can redefine and said, you everything that you do is Kedat Moshe v'Yisrael. On that condition, so we can go back and say, no, your bi'ah is zinut, and that's how they can undo that marriage. We now have a story about a sale under duress. Tabi tela lepapi akinara v'zaben. Chatam rabba bar hana amoda'a ve'ashkalta. So there was a man named Tabi. He was a bully, and he suspended this other guy named Papi on a certain tree called a kinara tree. Here's what this tree looks like. And he says, listen, you better sell me your field, or else I'm going to leave you hanging up here on the field. And so he said, okay, I have to do so. Now, Rabba bar Hana, one of the great sages, he signed on two different documents. He signed on a moda'ah, that's a preemptive protest. In other words, Tabi, rather the Papi, knew from the day before that Tabi is in town and he's going to come and threaten him and make him sell his field. So Papi went from beforehand to Rabba bar Hana and says, listen, I want to make a protest. I know Tabi is going to come. He's going to force me to sell some field to him, and I don't want the sale to be valid. So can you be my witness and sign this document that says that the whatever I do tomorrow is invalid? So Rabba bar Hana, he signed that document. Then the same sage, Rabba bar Hana, also signed the deed of sale, ashkalta, like shakal, to weigh something out, to take something. And so he signed both. So now the case came to adjudication before Rav Huna. Amar Rav Huna, man dechatima moda'a shapir hatim, uman dechatima ashkalta shapir hatim. Rav Huna says that whoever signed on the document of protest, it's a valid signing, meaning that document is valid. And whoever signed on the deed of sale is a valid signing. That's also valid. Now, this is very strange because you can't have both. Which one is correct? Is it the protest is correct and therefore the sale is not valid? or the sale is valid and we ignore the protest. So manafshach imoda la ashkalta vi ashkalta la moda'a. So that's exactly what we ask against Rav Huna, right? Pick a lane. If the protest is good, then the deed of sale is not good. If the deed of sale is not good, then the protest was not good. How can you say they're both valid? Hachika amar ilav moda'a madechatim ashkalta shapir chatim. Rather, this is what Rav Huna meant to say. If not for the protest, then whoever signed on the deed of sale would have been valid. In other words, Rav Huna is following his own opinion. Rav Huna l'ta'ameh, da'amar Rav Huna, talyuhu v'zabin, zibine. Rav Huna is consistent because he says that a forced sale under duress, is a valid sale. So, if this guy Tabi, the bully, came and forced Rapapi to sell him his land, and he wrote that down, and there was no protest beforehand, so then it would be a valid sale, even though it was under protest. That's what Rav Huna says. But then he says, well, it's a good thing that you wrote that document of protest. Since you protested it beforehand, and you have that in writing, therefore the sale is invalid. So it happened to be Rabba Bar Chana signed both. That's okay. He can sign both. And since he had the protest before he signed the document of sale, the protest wins out. Ini. Now we have a challenge to this, what the way Rav Huna ruled here. V'amar Rav Nachman, ha'edim shamru amana hayu devarenu en ne'emanim. Moda'a hayu devarenu en ne'emanim. Rav Nachman said that if witnesses came, they signed a document, a loan document. There's witnesses on it. However, they say orally, listen, I know we signed this document that says that this guy owes that guy $1,000, but this was not a real promissory note. There was no actually loan here. They wrote this document for a future loan that he's going to give later on, or maybe just for to show. This guy wanted to show, look, this guy owes me $1,000. See, I'm worth more than I am. It was just for show, but there was no real loan behind it. So even though we signed it and it looks like this borrower has to pay $1,000, really it's an invalid document. If witnesses say that, they are not believed. And similarly, if witnesses sign a document that says this guy sold it to that other person, but they say, oh, there was a protest before. Right before he signed it, the seller made a protest. They are not believed. So that's the question. How come over here the same Rabba Bar Chana? He signed both documents, and Rav Huna says we believe the protest and the sale is invalid. But here Rav Nachman said that if the very same witnesses said that this sale document, there was a protest before, they are not believed about the protest, and the sale document is valid. The answer is, Hanemili alpe de la ate alpe umar'a lishtara. Aval bishtara ate shetara umar'a lishtara. The Rav Nachman's rule was only when the witnesses say orally that what they signed is not valid. In that case, let's just do this example. They signed the document that said there's a deed of sale here. So we have a written document that there's a valid sale. Orally, they said, oh, there was a protest. So words that are only spoken orally do not have the power of a written document. They don't have the power to undo a written document. A written document is stronger. But in Rav Huna's case, that was two documents that Rabba Bar Chana signed, a document of protest. So a document does have the power to undo, to invalidate the document that comes afterwards. That's an important distinction. And let's just finish off this topic. Gufa amar Rav Nachman. Amana hayu devarenu en ne'emanim. Moda'a hayu devarenu en ne'emanin. So we requote Rav Nachman that says that if witnesses say, hey, this document that we signed, that's a loan document. Actually, it was a false loan document. There never was a loan. And he just wrote this, here, you can go show people that you're owed $1,000. But really, he doesn't have to pay. If they say that, he's not believed. And the same, Rav Nachman says, if they sign a document of sale, and then they say, oh, but there was a protest beforehand, orally, they are not believed. That was Rav Nachman, that basically an oral statement cannot undo a written document. However, there's a disagreement. Umor bar Rav Asher amar, amana hayu devarenu en ne'emanin, moda'a hayu devarenu ne'emanin, mai ta'ama. Umor bar Rav Asher disagree. He agrees on the first case, but not the second case. He says if the witnesses come and say, this loan document, it was never a real loan. We don't believe them. But if they signed on a deed of sale and they say, oh, there was a protest beforehand, they are believed. So what's the reason? Why does Mor bar Rav Ashi distinguish between the two? We understand Rav Nachman's view. He just says that a written document is stronger than any oral disclaimer. So why does Mor bar Rav Ashi distinguish between the two? And the answer is shezeh nitan likatev v'zeh lo nitan likatev, because a document of sale is a valid document that can be written. You can always write a document of sale. Now, they happen to say, oh, there was a protest before, and then the document of sale, so we believe that there was a protest before, and this document of sale was under duress. But that's okay, because the witnesses are not self-incriminating themselves. However, an amanah is not allowed to be written. You're not allowed to write an amanah or sign an amanah. This is not a good thing to have around. It's like a check that looks like it was given, but really wasn't given. So I can't give you a check and say, here's a check, but don't deposit. You can show it to people, like for them to see that you're rich, but don't really deposit it. So it's a false document, and therefore the witnesses are not allowed to sign that document in the first place. And so when the witnesses come and say, oh yeah, we did sign it, but it was an amanah, they are incriminating themselves, and therefore we don't believe them to incriminate themselves, and we say, no, if you sign this document, it was a valid loan document, and now for some reason you're changing your tune, you want to protect someone, so we don't believe that you would do something so bad and sign an amanah. That explains the distinction according to Mor bar Rav Ashi. Baruch Adonai Leolam, Amen ve'amen.